Human behavior can seem random, but in fact, there is order and consistency. Preferred ways of thinking and acting can be sorted into psychological types. And you can find out your psychological type with MBTI, today's most trusted personality questionnaire. Good to have you with us. I'm An Jang-hyun for Heart to Heart. When you know your psychological type, it is better for you to understand and manage your lifestyle and behavior. That is why many people are interested in this method called MBTI, and we're going to talk more about that with Peter Geyer. Good to have you with us.
Pleased.
So, you've studied and conducted, I guess, MBTI for the last 20 years. Let's first establish what MBTI stands for.
Okay, MBTI stands for Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. So it's a questionnaire made up by two American women whose names are in the title. And what they wanted to do was to find a pragmatic way of implementing C.G. Jung's theory of psychological types. And being Americans, culturally the best way for them to do that was to make up a questionnaire. It's not something that Jung would have considered at all. He didn't actually like statistics or questionnaires at all. But so they did that starting in 1942, and it still continues on even though Isabel Myers died in 1980. So
the MBTI assessment itself, the questionnaire itself, continues to be modified?
Yeah, the one I have here dates from 1998. It's actually the latest revision. And it's mainly because people's use of words and phrases changes, and so you need to actually have questions that enable you to get the answer that you want, because all questionnaires set out to give you the answer that they want. So if you have a good question, someone's going to respond to it properly. So if you want to find out whether someone is, say, for instance, extroverted or introverted, you need to have a good question that enables a person who is extroverted but not really too sure about it to say, oh yes, I'm more likely to be that than the other one, and so there'll be questions like that.
Are there many other questionnaires of this kind?
Actually, on the internet there are a lot, and very often they're not as well oriented to the theory as the MBTI. One of the reasons why the MBTI works is that there's a lot of research behind it, but also that the people that made it up and the people since have actually studied the theory and have actually tried to make sure that the questionnaire reflects the theory. For instance, one of the preferences on the MBTI is something called feeling. It's the opposite of thinking, but feeling is not emotion in Jung's ideas. Emotion is something else. So you'll have questionnaires that will actually ask you something about emotion, and they claim to be MBTI-like or Jungian questionnaires. So it's that sort of thing.
Well, the theory, I'm sure, is important, but also important is that the assessment result, when the results come out, do they accurately portray what kind of psychological type this person is? In that aspect, I mean, could it be one reason why the MBTI is regarded as the most trusted?
Yeah, well, there are two things. One thing, it actually goes down to the questions, so the questions have to be good. The second thing is that there's a process that you have to go through when you give people the MBTI that actually tells them partly what it is and how you're supposed to respond. You see, because your psychological type is not necessarily behaviour. There are certain things in your culture that you won't do. Okay, but in another culture, if you were the same type, you would do. Does that sort of make sense? So the idea is that it's actually what you would prefer to do sometimes, even if you've never done it.
So that's what psychological type means. Your preferred.
Yeah, this is what I'd like to do.
Behavior,
I mean,
or thinking.
I'm not a timely person. You know, I tend to be random and last minute and all that sort of thing. But I've learned to turn up on time because I think it's a good idea. So I've still got the same type, and I do my best work, my best writing at the last moment. but also know that professionally I need to be on time and to be timely with other sorts of things. So I try and manage my life that way.
So what is the reason why it's being revised continuously? Because what, society
Well, it's really,
changes?
yeah. Also, there are better methods of making up questionnaires. There's a lot of statistics that's actually behind that. And with the advent of better computers, you've actually got scoring methods that can make it more accurate. I mean, that's a business decision in some respects more than anything else.
So how are the results or the answers analysed afterwards?
Okay, well, essentially like this. You can actually fill it out on the internet, and you did actually show MBTI Complete, which is in actual fact is solely on the internet. My preference is for getting it hand scored, so that means that I would give you a question booklet and an answer sheet, and you would respond to that. Then I would go away and I would score it, and then I would think about what my responses were going to be, and then I would talk to you in what's called a feedback session, which has to be a minimum of 45 minutes. And I would say, okay, before I've given you your results, I'd talk to you about the different sets of preferences. And then I'd say to you, well, what do you prefer? And you could say, oh, I prefer, say, for instance, extroversion, or I prefer introversion. Or you could say, I'm not sure. And it doesn't matter whether you know or not. So you go that you've had a discussion, so we move on through the 4 sets of preferences. And then when you've got some sort of idea as to what it is and you've said, well, I think I'm that, then I'd give you your results. And most of the time, they're the same. Okay. Now, when they're different, the point really is, and this is why the MBTI is an indicator and not a test, is that the really important thing is, who are you? You know, you don't need to know, you don't need to fill out the MBTI in order to know your type. You can actually, you know, read a paper or anything, say on my website or anybody else's, and if it's well written enough, you can say, oh, okay, I think I'm this, you know. And then there are things that follow from that. There's a developmental theory that goes with the MBTI, which means, okay, you've got your results, but it's important for me to know what your age is. Jung was the inventor of midlife and all those sorts of things. And so there's a developmental pattern that can actually say, well, when you're actually using the preferences that you like, and the preferences that you don't like, when you actually need to develop those as you get older.
So how many preference categories are there?
Well, there are 16. That's actually, Jung had 8. Isabel Myers actually wanted to know more about how the types ran their lives, you know, lifestyle. Not too keen on the term, but how do you want to live? Do you want to be scheduled, structured, ordered, or do you want to be, you know, last minute, more impulse, that sort of thing? And so she came up with 16. Jung said it doesn't matter how many types you come up with, it depends on what sort of categories you go with. So the 16, it doesn't mean that you can't actually say, well, I think there are 32, because obviously there are thousands of different psyches. But 16 is actually probably manageable.
So what does the type say about you then?
Okay, it's about a couple of things. The basic thing is about perception and judgment. Okay, perception is what sort of information interests me, and judgment is what sort of decision am I going to make about it. So perception is 2 things. It can either be sensation or sensing, which is the information that interests me, if I prefer that, is the information that you see. You know, I'm going to want to touch it. I'm going to want to experience it in order to know something about it. The other component, and it's an opposite, fairly much like yin-yang, really, actually very much like yin-yang, in that intuition is the opposite. And intuition is I'm not so much interested in what I see and touch. Matter of fact, I may not notice that at all, but I'm more interested in the possibilities. What are the implications? What's the meaning? So I wouldn't be interested in the facts so much as the interpretation of the facts. So in most societies, you're actually looking at 2 to 3 times more sensing people than intuitive people. Okay, and it sort of ranges in Australia, perhaps 75% sensing. There's some data from Singapore that says 85, but you don't know whether that's a cultural artefact because of their society or whether it's actually them. So, you know.
So it's kind of a scale then. It's like it's not like you're either this or that. People can be somewhere along the line.
Yeah, but not in the scale terms. You can be somewhere along the line in terms of how you actually use your type. For instance, I'm an introvert, and if I answered if I answered the MBTI, I wouldn't answer any question for extroversion. Okay, but I'm extroverting now talking to you, and it's a pleasant experience, so therefore you can say, okay, I can extrovert. But my preference is to actually spend more of my time by myself and do all that. So that's actually why I do reading and research. They're more likely to be introverts than extroverts. So that's the idea. See, and a lot of musicians are introverts because the performance is actually important. Entertainers in some respects may actually be more likely to be extroverts. It's hard to tell, but you can actually look and see how people do these sorts of things. You know, whether an artist, say a Bob Dylan, you know, does Bob Dylan speak to the audience? No. He does other sorts of things, so you can actually infer from that that he's an introvert.